Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us for the 14th Stoke Newington History Talks event. Thrilled to be back. It's been a long time. I was hoping that we can do this one in person in St. Matthias Halls, but I don't think that's going to be the case for a while. So at least we can make it happen still. We have a great lineup for you this evening. I'm going to be talking about aerial photos. Billy's going to talk about firefighting in Stoke Newington. Caz is going to talk about living in Clissold House in the 80s and 90s. As always, very kind of different topics, but the thing that brings them all together is Stoke Newington. And it still amazes me just to see how many more topics and talks I'm able to get together every sort of 3 months or so, even after this hiatus. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amir Dotan. I'm basically kind of, I guess, the person behind StokeNewingtonHistory.com, which is my passion project, if you like. Been doing it now for almost 7 years. Just researching and sharing and documenting Stoke Newington's rich and quite amazing history. There are daily updates almost on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So if you're not on any of those and you would like to get your daily dose of Stoke Newington history, old photos, anecdotes, videos, mashups, all that great stuff, you can join any one of those. If you'd like to know about upcoming events or when recordings of previous sort of events become available, do join the mailing list. So if you go on my website, StokeNewingtonHistory.com, just below the bio, there's a link, and you'll join the very sort of happy group of people that get notified every time tickets become available. As I mentioned, this is the 14th event, which is quite extraordinary. The first one was in late 2016, upstairs in the Clarence, in front of 25 people, which I thought was amazing. And it got very popular very quickly. We had to then move to the White Hart for a few events. I think we were sort of 40 at that point, as far as squeezing people in without breaking any health and safety regulations. By the time we got to St. Matthias Halls, I think on average, 150 tickets would sell within the first 24 hours, which was amazing. It was always great fun to see so many familiar faces and just learn and hear about all these fascinating topics and subjects that all the amazing guest speakers shared with the audience. I really missed that environment and that vibe, and like everyone else, we're getting used to doing things more remotely, hopefully not for too long. As I mentioned, we've had so many talks and speakers over the years. This is the list of the last 39. There are 3 more this evening, which I'll add to the list later. Most, if not all of the slides are on my website, also some video snippets from the talks. So if you're kind of missing one of them, or if you just want to relive it, then you're more than welcome to go and visit. The last few events have also been used to raise money for local charities. I'm thrilled to say that tonight's event has raised roughly £500 for the Hackney Food Bank, which is extraordinary. I think for this event, we had about 150 tickets sold. But when you think about that compared to the other events, these are almost ticket per household rather than individuals. In the past, we would get, in many cases, couples and friends and even groups coming together. So all in all, I think it's still a great, great achievement. In total, the last few events, I think the last 7, when I started charging, have raised just about sort of £4,000 for local charities. And you get a sense of all those different charities. If you have a charity in mind, a local charity that you'd like to propose for a future event, do get in touch. I already have one for February, but hopefully 2021, we're going to have a few more events. So don't hesitate. As I mentioned, quite a lineup this evening. I'm really looking forward to hearing Billy and Caz talk about their respective topics. Tonight's talks have been pre-recorded just to avoid any technical glitches, but all the speakers, myself included, are here and looking forward to getting your questions. So in YouTube, you have a chat. Really looking forward to see any questions, any comments, any observations you have. And after each talk, speakers will spend about 5 minutes answering any questions you might have. So anything on your mind, don't hesitate, type it in and we'll pick it up right after the talk. I'm going to kick off talking about old aerial photos, which I find fascinating. A lot of detail, and you can spend so much time zooming in and uncovering quite a few things in them. I'm going to be focusing on a few. Hopefully you'll enjoy that. And as I said, if you want to know about the next event or recordings of previous events, join the mailing list. Let's kick off. Hi everyone, I'm going to be sharing a few really great old aerial photos of Stoke Newington. I love aerial photos. They've got so much detail and you can see so many things that you don't normally see in old photos. I've collected a few from the 30s, 40s and beyond, and you really get a sense of what Stoke Newington used to look like before World War II, before a lot of the housing developments that took place in the 40s and afterwards, and also the bomb damage. We're going to look at some photos that were taken just in the aftermath in the kind of early 40s. Bomb sites, churches that are long gone, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. We're going to go in a chronological order, so I've got some photos as we're going to see from the very kind of early 20th century, and we're going to work our way up. The first one is a really interesting one of Clissold Park. You can see there's a caption saying it was photographed from an aeroplane. Someone told me once it was a kite, but I thought that was probably going to be sort of too heavy to lift on a very big kite, so let's assume it was an aeroplane. And this is a really great photo because you get a sense of not just Clissold Park, and you've got Clissold House, you've got the New River, but you also see the streets around it, and some of them have changed quite considerably. For example, you can see the east side of Clissold Road, where the school is now, just on the right. Those houses were there. We're going to see them later on in the presentation, but I want to focus on another kind of set of houses that you can also spot in this photo. Okay, if you notice just on Church Street facing the park, you've got this really charming semi-detached houses. Because I know a lot of those kind of buildings and houses from photos, every time I see an aerial photo, straight away I try and get a sense of whether or not those houses are there and how they looked. This was that. This was Glebe Place. There were 4 houses in total, semi-detached, and they were on the corner of Clissold Road, facing the park. Really nice houses. These were very typical houses to this part of Stoke Newington. The whole stretch from Clissold Road all the way to Green Lanes was called Paradise Row, and it really had these large, in some cases, Georgian houses that were homes to Stoke Newington's most affluent residents. I created a few then and now animations that I'm going to be using in the talk just to illustrate just how the streetscape has changed. And for Glebe Place, I created this one. So you can see this is what the view is today. And if you're struggling to imagine where those houses were, right on the corner, you can see the gate, you had the pillar, and that was the view. Completely changed, and this was a theme that we're going to see across of old houses demolished to make room for a lot of flats, building blocks, housing development. Had a huge impact on the streetscape of Stoke Newington over the years. Here's another view of the park, slightly different angle. Pretty much the same year, I would even imagine the same sort of photo shoot, if you like. I really like this one because you get a very nice view of the old bandstand that was just by Clissold House. You can also see the original New River, and I'm going to talk about that later as well. The bandstand, here's a very nice sort of colored photo. Could be, I think it's a photo, if not like a half photo, half painting. It was erected in 1894, just slightly after the park opened. This was referred to as the rustic bandstand, and you can pretty much see why. Very charming still. This is another image of it with the girl kind of posing. They would have dances, I believe, every Saturday. So you'd have a band playing, but I think that sort of came maybe sort of further along in the kind of the 50s and early 60s before it was pulled down after it was vandalized and burned down. So that was Clissold Park. We're going to move slightly further north. This is Woodberry Down. Hard to believe. The road bang in the middle, that's Green Lanes, just heading towards Manor House. You've got Finsbury Park on the top left corner, and you've got Seven Sisters Road running along kind of the middle and the right, and that's the West Reservoir. I love this photo because you really get a sense of what Woodberry Down looked like before the estate was built. It was almost semi-rural. You can see very large Victorian villas, semi-detached or detached, with really very spacious back gardens, to say the least. There was also a tennis club on Green Lanes, and they had a few courts there as well. Very picturesque, very much almost echoing kind of the Victorian Stoke Newington. It was thinly populated. It was a fairly sort of small parish in that area. But in the 1930s, there was a lot of effort to create modern housing for people that were moved on from areas that were defined as slum clearance areas. Woodberry Down was designated an area for redevelopment. Compulsory purchase orders were issued for all these large houses, but the building had to be postponed because of the Second World War. And by 1952, this is what it looked like. The Woodberry Down Estate, very much hailed as the estate of the future. 57 housing blocks in total were built in Woodberry Down in Stoke Newington. It had the first purpose-built comprehensive school in London, and one of the first ones in the country. It had the first purpose-built NHS health centre as well. So it was very much almost, if you like, a village within Stoke Newington. And this is just 1952. The construction began in 1948, and pretty much most of it finished by 1962. So it ended up looking very, very different from what it did in the 30s, in that original photo. You can still see along Green Lanes some of the kind of the original houses on the other side. But by this point, Woodberry Down was completely changed. The site on the right, that's where the school would go in a few years. This is kind of a view of what it looks like today. The estate has been going through a considerable regeneration. A lot of the old housing blocks have been pulled down and newer ones have been built. This is an ongoing process. It's meant to go on for a number of years. But this gives you a sense of just how Woodberry Down, from the Victorian semi-rural, very kind of well-to-do area, to then becoming an estate, and now again going through a lot of transformation. I think the one thing that is always consistent is the reservoir. So let's sort of move on. We looked at the 30s, Woodberry Down. Moving on, this is a great aerial photo from 1944. There's so much detail, and I guess you can probably spend the whole day just zooming in and looking into every aspect of it. We don't have that much time, so I'm just going to focus on a few things. For me, I think the most dominant feature, almost, if you like, are the filter beds. There used to be 9 filter beds in Green Lanes, just opposite the pumping station, not to be confused with the 2 reservoirs. And you can clearly see them in this photo. They really stand out. And this is also a very easy and quick way to kind of locate and orient yourself when you're looking at these kind of photos. This is a view from 1980, really nice one that shows the filter beds, and if you like, the entire waterworks complex, because you've got the filter beds, you've got the 2 reservoirs, you can see the pumping station, you can see the 1936 filtration plant, you get the full view. Some of you might ask, what happened to the filter beds? You know, they look so nice, you could use it for so many things. I'm going to get to the campaign in a second, but the reality was that they were no longer needed by the mid 20th century, I believe. They were originally put there between 1855 and 1883 to purify water as part of the kind of the water purification process. And there were 9 in total. But by the mid 20th century, Thames Water didn't need them anymore, and basically was looking to offload the site, use it for other things, maybe sort of cash in from developers and so on. And this really kickstarts one of a number of campaigns that Stoke Newington has had in the last sort of few kind of centuries almost. The Save the Reservoirs campaign started in the 80s, concluded sort of mid-90s, And this was a very vocal, persistent, important campaign to save the West Reservoir and the filter beds. There was a whole talk that Monica Blake gave about this campaign a few years ago. Really fascinating story. I don't think that many people know about it, which is a shame. But there was very active attempts to try and save the filter beds, use them for other purposes. Unfortunately, while the campaign was successful in saving the West Reservoir, it wasn't successful in saving the filter beds, and houses were built on the site. This is the view today, if you were kind of looking from, I guess, the Clissold pumping station. The original railings are still there, by the way, along Green Lanes, and as far as I'm aware, they're listed. So next time you walk up and down Green Lanes and you see those nicely kind of ornate Victorian railings, those were from the original filter beds complex. So staying with this 1944 map, it's quite amazing when you zoom in into the park and you realize it was all allotments. If you look at the original photo, you can see that something looks a bit different. And when you zoom in, you get this beautiful, sort of very interesting patterns. And the park, as it was used also in World War I, was used for allotments. Zooming in, this is a really nice view. You see Clissold Park, you can see the bandstand as well, right? You've got the two ponds. The other interesting feature of this particular photo as well is the original course of the New River. So if you look, it actually formed a beautiful horseshoe shape there. Just to highlight it, you can see the original New River entered the park in Green Lanes and then sort of exited in Church Street. And I'm going to talk about that later on. And this was basically the course of the river since 1613 when it opened. But the course of the New River was truncated and shortened. And by 1946, it ended in the East Reservoir. So all this was just standing water. It wasn't needed. Unfortunately, it got sort of truncated in the park more and more. And what we are left with today is technically a pond. It's not connected to the New River itself. And it really kind of captures, if you like, just a small part of that course just in front of the house, a bit along the deer pan as well. But this is not connected to the New River anymore. If you like, it's almost a remnant of what the New River was in Clissold Park. This is a view from 1946, just 2 years after the previous one. This one is quite interesting because we can still see the allotments, but we can also start seeing bomb sites and prefabs as well, like the one bang in the middle at the bottom of Clissold Road. And there's a lot of other interesting details I'm going to be looking into in the next few minutes. I'd like to kind of focus your attention now to this, I guess, sort of feature that looks very odd and peculiar, right? If you're looking at it, it's a sort of rectangular shape. If we zoom in, we can see that it's within a bomb clearance site. And I think for a while I wasn't even sure what that was until one of our sort of returning sort of guest speakers, Nick Hyam, gave a fascinating talk about World War II, bomb damage and sort of redevelopment, and basically kind of solve the mystery in that talk, and I'll get to that in a second. You can see that entire area of kind of Hawksley Road and sort of Sandbrook Road sustained severe damage. You can see that the dark blue basically means that there was nothing to salvage, and that whole area was cleared to build the Hawksley Court estate. And this gives you a sense of what that rectangle was. This was an emergency water supply that you would use to take down fires or anything else that was needed in case the mains weren't working. And you had a few of those dotted around, usually within sort of bomb sites. You can see that all the kind of the rubble was cleared, but those houses that you can see on the left were also cleared, including Lillian Street. That was the street just there in the middle where the car is, disappeared under the new estate. This view is looking from Sandbrook Road, so you can see the spire and kind of really get a sense of where you are now. But this was the view very much in the mid-40s. This is what I mentioned. This is not from the site itself. but just to give you a bit of context, and you might actually see that in other photos if you're looking at other historical photographs. These were the emergency water supplies. This was the view from Albion Road. So same scene, and you can see the kind of, if you like, kind of the emergency water supply just behind the trees, kind of fenced off, right, just before the estate was built. And next up, in this fascinating view, I'm going to turn your attention to something that very easy to miss, but I was very curious about it. This is a really interesting spot where you can see where the New River exited Clissold Park under Church Street and then continued towards Aden Terrace and then sort of Patherton Road. And you can see, I don't know if you kind of have a quick look, there's also quite a large sort of house or a large sort of structure that you can just see in front of the river. That was Kenaway Hall, a very large building. Believe it or not, this was actually built as a private residence, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Today, you would think this could probably be a hotel, but this was, again, on kind of that stretch of Church Street that was called Paradise Row, facing the park. These were kind of the large houses, the really kind of affluent residents, bankers, merchants. Most of them were Quakers at the time as well. This was the scene, this was the view. This is another view of Kenaway Hall, originally called the Willows. So this is looking east. So if you just came from Clissold Crescent and turn right, this would be the view. At the moment, if you think about what's there now, it's basically open space. So where the lamppost is, that's where you basically have the 393 bus stop, and Kenaway Hall Estate is slightly further up. And this lovely building was demolished in 1953. This is the view looking east. So you can just see a bit of Kenaway Hall on the right. You've got the New River, as I said, running along Church Street. You can just see a tiny bit of Paradise Bridge, I believe, on the very kind of bottom left corner. But that's where you could enter the park as well. And that's where the New River went, just under Church Street. And this is the view of Paradise Bridge from Clissold Park. Looks very different now. So just to help you get your bearings, this is the view today. This photo was taken just before the bridge was demolished, and the whole section along Church Street was drained and filled in 10 years later, in 1958. And next feature we're going to look at, hopefully you can kind of look. Ideally, you have this sort of full screen as well. This is a really interesting one because you look at it and what you have, I mean, I guess the only word you can describe it are the ruins, the carcass of a church that was completely bombed, sustained direct hit, and just this very eerie shadow that you can get a sense of one of the towers and the windows. This was St. Faith's Church in Lonsborough Road, corner of Knebworth Road. And you can see here, again, looking at the bomb damage map, it sustained a direct hit in 1944 and was completely destroyed, as you're going to see in a few photos in a minute. So this was the view. And as you saw in the aerial photo, it had one tower standing, which cast that shadow with all the windows. This is another view. You can see the area was being cleared, the church was being pulled down, and an estate was built on the site. And this is a then and now animation that I created to show what's the view now. Looked very, very different when the church was there. Almost hard to imagine that it was located there, but yeah, I mean, it's quite astonishing when you realize just how much bomb damage has changed the streetscape, and all these grand buildings, in some cases like this one, completely vanished. And looking at this view from 1949, this is Stoke Newington Road cutting across, and this view is looking, if you like, northeast. The one that I'm going to start with is another church. So we looked at St. Faith's. There was also Devonshire Square Church, just on the corner of Walford Road. There's a much smaller church now, but you can see the one that got bombed, right? Again, like with St. Faith's, you can see the, if you like, almost the remains of that church. A lot of devastation. but luckily this one was built to some extent. This was the view from inside. So very much gives you a sense of the destruction and kind of the impact that the bombing had on this church. Like the others, very grand. This is the view today. This was the view back when. So you had all these large sort of churches, quite a few of them sustained damage, some did not make it. This church was rebuilt, then it was rebuilt again, slightly smaller, and now only the section that you can see on the left remains. The next sort of feature just to focus on is this building in the middle. This was the Alexandra Theatre and Opera House, also called the Alexandra Palace, the Alex, the Palace, had different owners, different names over the years. This was at 65 Stoke Newington Road. You can clearly see that it's quite unusual. There were quite a few cinemas along the kind of the main road. This was one of them. This was the view. As you can see, kind of late Victorian. This was, if you like, almost kind of the sibling of the Hackney Empire. So Stoke Newington had its own Hackney Empire called the Alexandra Theatre. Very grand. You can almost imagine the shows that were on there, later kind of movies as well. Just to give you a sense of how the streetscape has changed over the years. It was derelict, I believe, during the 50s, and in the early 60s it was demolished and a housing block was built on the site called Alexandra Court. So they retained the name to some extent. And that was it. So thank you very much. Hopefully you've gained an appreciation of aerial photos. They might look a bit intimidating at first, but there's so many hidden gems and so many details to dive into and look at. Like I said, this was quite tricky to try and really pick only a few. I'm happy to make all these photos available. So if you're interested to see your street or your house or explore those in more details, do get in touch and I'll happily share them. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed the talk. As I said, we got 5 minutes or so. If you have any questions, I noticed there were a few. There's a lot that can be said about these aerial photos. As always, it was very difficult to try and just pick a few examples, and I think this was the trimmed version as well. Just to look at some of the questions that came through, and if you have any more, please tap away. There's no need to be shy. I think we got enough time. So there was one question from Caroline about the Save the Reservoirs campaign, saying it was incredible. I'd love to hear another talk about it. Is Monica still around? So Monica is still around, and she gave a talk about the campaign a few years ago at one of these events. We got the slides. She shared with me quite a bit of material and fascinating paperwork that sheds a lot of light on the campaign. I hope that one day all of it can be uploaded and shared properly. If you're interested, do get in touch. I'm more than happy to make all of it available. I'm also happy to put you in touch with Monica Blake if you'd like to talk to her and find out more about the campaign itself. She was one of the members. But apart from that, like I said, we had the talk in the past, so I don't think we'll do a repeat necessarily. There were a couple of questions from Annette Jones. Why was Stoke Newington bombed so heavily in World War II? There were no factories. There's surely that Hitler would want to destroy. The reality is I'm not exactly sure what was the kind of the bombing strategy of the Germans in World War II. Nick Hyam actually gave a really fascinating talk about bomb damage, so I might have to ask him. But if you think about it, Stoke Newington in the 40s was quite industrial. The waterworks in Green Lanes was a really key, I would say, strategic, if you like, sort of point that was responsible for the water supply of London. Believe it or not, I believe the New River is still
supplying 10% of the water supply in London, from what I heard. So I don't know if they were targeting the reservoirs and the filter beds and the castles specifically. I mean, I don't know if even from the air at night, could they have actually targeted? But I think that certain parts of the area were definitely hit more than others. But I'm not entirely sure what was the strategy and how they applied it. But now I'm quite curious to find out. Another one from Annette saying, no, these beautiful churches were easy targets. But again, why would the Germans bomb them? I don't think that they were deliberately targeting the churches, and if they could even had the type of bombs that could actually target such a specific target. But the reality is that quite a few churches were hit. I don't know if that's just a statistical anomaly or there was something else about them, that because if you think about it, St. Faith's was destroyed, Devonshire Square was badly damaged, St. Mary's, new and old, were damaged as well. So there are quite a few churches, but I'm not aware of them being specifically targeted to damage sort of morale and spirituality or anything like that. Let me see if there's anything else. Tom Uprichard is saying the town hall was camouflage painted, but was really visible from the air. 1944, waste of paint. The topic of the camouflage on the town hall comes up quite a lot. I don't think many people really think it was meant to camouflage. I mean, especially not from the air. Someone told me there was a net as well around it. From what I've observed and from what I read, I think it was more for morale, because that was kind of the civil defense headquarters. So during a time of war, you walk down Church Street, you see this almost like an army looking structure. I think it was maybe meant to provide people with a sense of pride and sort of sense of security, rather than confusing any invading army that the town hall wasn't there. And as far as air bombings, if they were at night as well, I'm not too sure how much that very kind of artistic looking brown and green paint would have made much difference. It looks nice, it's a nice anecdote, and it is listed as far as I'm aware. Nick Perry is asking, how frequently were aerial surveys done? So I know that there was an Air Force survey done in 1946 and 44, I believe. So some of the photos that I showed, you can find them on the Historic England website, I think. And those were done specifically to map out the bomb damage and just take stock of what happened. There's another website called England from Above. That's where I found the Woodberry Down photo from the 30s. So I'm not exactly sure whether those surveys were done post-war or if they were done by any kind of civilian body for any other kind of purposes. But I'm sure that Nick will find out and let me know by the end of the evening. So looking forward to that. Yeah, there's, Stokey Sue asks, whether or not the roof of the church would show up in the moonlight. Could be. I mean, it's always interesting to kind of speculate and come up with some ideas and suggestions. So I don't know, could be. Okay, we got people contributing to the conversation. That's really good. So Aileen is talking about, in the later stages of the Blitz, the Germans expected bombing from primarily industrial sites to include civilian targets as well. So yeah, if you know any of the answers that I don't, please type them in. I'm sure that people would very much appreciate to learn as well. I think I'll take a couple more and then we'll get on with the next talk, which I'm really looking forward to. Was Paradise Road the official name for that stretch of houses on Church Street, or just informal name? When did the name Paradise Road disappear? It was very much the formal name. So if before 1937, a lot of the old parishes and villages, they had all these names for specific rows and terraces of houses, and those were very common. So along Church Street, you would have Paradise Row, you would have Abney Terrace, Clarence Terrace, you would have all of these. And Paradise Row is the name that is listed in all the street directories. So your address would have been the Willows, Paradise Row, or number 11 Paradise Row, for example. So very much sought after address, I'm sure. But in 1937, there was a wholesale renaming and renumbering of streets across London because there were a lot of duplicative names. Some of you might know that there's a Paradise Row in Bethnal Green. So a lot of streets like Park Street, Park Road, High Street, Church Street, Park Crescent, all those names were in every parish. So in 1937, they abolished a lot of those, if you like, names of terraces and rows. So Paradise Row was absorbed into Stoke Newington Church Street. It was Church Street before 1937, and then it became Stoke Newington Church Street for quite a while, the longest street name in London. So yeah, that was definitely a very sought after address, I'm sure. How long did the allotments last in Clissold Park? Good question. I think I might have a photo from the early 50s, 1954, and it's not there anymore. So I believe, purely based on that, that it was there around the kind of the 40s, maybe even kind of late 40s, but pretty sure that you don't see them in the 1954 aerial photos. Any other questions that I missed? No, just kind of scrolling up. Otherwise, keep asking away. If I can't answer now, then I'll stick around afterwards. Otherwise, just email me. It's always great to keep the conversation going. So I think we're ready for our next speaker, and I'm really, really excited about this one, because when I got in touch with Caz and she kind of told me that she lived in Clissold House, I thought that she meant a different house. We had a conversation on Twitter and there was a photo of the house, and I think she said, "Oh, I used to live there." And I said, "What do you mean live there? You mean right next to the park, right?" And she said, "No, I used to live in Clissold House. I used to work in the park and I had a flat upstairs." And I thought, this is extraordinary. I've never met anyone that actually lived in that amazing mansion. So finally managed to, with everything that's been going on in the last 9 months, got her to record an amazing talk about her time working and living in Clissold Park, and a very unique experience and a very unique perspective of living in a flat in Clissold House. So we're going to watch her presentation, and then she's going to take any questions you might have. I already have two, so let's go.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Caz Richards, and I lived in Clissold House from 1986 to 1999. So I'm here tonight to talk about that experience. But before I do, a quick bit about myself. As I said, my name's Caz, and I worked for the London Borough of Hackney for 23 years. And 13 of those years, I lived in Clissold House, which was great. I had many jobs during that time. I started in 1978 as a gardener and zookeeper. And a few years after that, I moved on to be Nature Conservation Officer for Hackney Council, and sort of took on more of an environmental education role. A few years after that, I progressed up the corporate ladder and became Neighbourhood Park Manager for Stamford Hill. So not only was I living in Clissold Park, I got to actually be based at Springfield Park in Springfield House, which was also fabulous. I left London Borough of Hackney in 2001. My husband at the time got a job with the Corporation of London, so we lived on Hampstead Heath. So from one lovely green space to another. I'm currently living in Dorset, in Weymouth on the south coast, which is fantastic. I still miss my London fixes, but my son lives in London, so I do come up quite regularly, and we go and visit Clissold Park, which is fantastic, and sort of relive some of the old memories. So how did I end up living in Clissold Park? Well, it was simple, really. Like I said, started in 1978 as assistant gardener and zookeeper. And I'd heard on the grapevine that there was a flat available in the mansion. Obviously, as a gardener in the park, we all knew about the mansion. We worked around it and did lots of gardening, and occasionally had to go inside. So I was aware of the space. And I always loved it because I love old buildings. Anyway, I'd heard about the flat and thought, well, how do I apply for this? So got my act together, put in a letter of application, had an interview, and I knew there was a little bit of stiff competition from other members of staff, but fortunately I was offered the flat. So I said, yes, please. It was not bad for £15 a week. It wasn't actually rent, it was all done on a license agreement. So I had to sign that. And basically for £15 a week for 13 years, I lived in this amazing mansion. One of the reasons I got the flat was because I was working in the zoo. So I was actually there for a bit of nighttime security as well. So that was kind of all right. It was just myself and my son for the first few years. It was a great space and a great place to live, and you know, we had a whale of a time. It was on the first floor of the house, so we had to go all up that lovely spiral staircase to get there, which was wonderful. Not so good actually when you're dragging up loads of bags of shopping, but still not bad. It was a 2-bedroom flat then, and Amir has sorted out some fabulous slides for me this evening. But one of the nice ones is it's a shot of my former flat as it looks today. So if you can think about that as the flat which used to look over the animal enclosure, those walls were divided. So there was a sitting room and 2 bedrooms, and following on there was kitchen and bathroom. But the front of the flat, the portico overlooked the animal enclosure. So I could get on and live there and bring up my son, also keeping an eye on the animals, which was great. Right, we're just moving on now to another slide, which is a lovely, great internal photograph of the staircase. And for those of you who haven't been inside the mansion, it really is a treat. I mean, that picture is fantastic because it's got it's opened up spaces that when I lived there were it was a wall there, so you never could sort of see through it. But that staircase is amazing. Like I said to you before, it's great if you haven't got to tramps up and down with shopping or children's bikes or whatever else my son decided that he wanted to drag upstairs and drag downstairs. But there was a time when I thought it'd be nice if James could play the piano. So I bought a second-hand piano. Thought that was a brilliant idea. Not such a brilliant idea when you've got to take to get it up all those stairs, and without my colleagues in the Parks Patrol, as it was called then, we would never have done it. So it took us 2 days to get that piano all the way up those stairs. We did it in bits, but we finally managed it. Sadly, I have to report that my son never really took the piano up, but it was a nice try. It was lovely to have a piano in the flat. Just moving on there to look at an external shot of the mansion and the mansion lawn. You'll see it's the sort of back side of the mansion, as it were. When I first started as a gardener, that ground floor space was used as shower rooms. So when the guys and girls had finished playing football, they'd all rush over to the mansion, and there'd be the girls' changing rooms and boys' changing rooms. So it was always on Sunday morning, there was that sort of everyone clonking around in the bottom of it all with mud on their football boots, and also that smell of white horse oil. So those of a certain age will probably know what I'm talking about. But it sort of brings back memories, and looking at these photos now sort of sparks all different sorts of emotions and feelings. There's a slide of a wedding. So we were opposite St Mary's Church. So the rose lawn was the setting for many a wedding, which is always nice to have a look at. One of the things that people always used to find a bit odd was when I said I lived in the park, well, they look at me and they say, well, how do you get in and out? Well, obviously I had a key to the gate, but I think people kind of forgot that. So once we overcame all that, that's fine. But yes, we did have a key to the gate. So I used to come in and go out after the park patrol, or park keepers as they're now called, locked up. If at some point I didn't ever have a key, and I think I was very rarely without mine, on the Queen Elizabeth walk side going up to the town hall, traditionally a couple of the railings were bent, so just big enough to get in and out should you not have your key to get in. So that was always a handy little shortcut. The mansion always had a great feeling, and my son and I were never scared about living there. No nasty ghosts, no horrible things, just sort of history of lots and lots of people. And it always makes me smile when I look at that that postcard of the park and the day it opened back in the 1880s. And when you think sort of just over 100 or so years ago, all those people were in and out of my flat. So it's almost like the ghost of the past. So that's sort of quite a nice sort of memory to take away. I love that portico as well. Although we could have access onto it, Very rarely did, because you're in public view. And although I've always worked with the public, I'm quite a private person really, so I used to like my privacy. But it was nice to sort of throw open the windows on a nice sunny day and just take in the rays really. Of course, living in the mansion, we were living above a cafe. When I first moved in, it was just about ready to close. The previous tenant was getting ready to move out. So there was a bit of fallow period where there was no one in there. And then Christine Jackson was offered the tenancy and moved into the cafe, cleared all the previous tenants' stuff out, and kind of made it into what it is today really. I mean, she kind of started that whole cafe society thing in Clissold Park. And it suddenly became a very trendy place to go and have a cup of coffee. I think we call them yummy mummies now. But it was a great place for kids to go after school to get a really cool and funky range of ice creams and ice lollies from the cafe that Christine used to stock, natural fruit lollies and stuff, which probably didn't have before. But there's nothing wrong with the odd Zoom or the odd Nivy, of course. And then, of course, the cafe was serving really good coffee and fantastic carrot cake. So the whole place was really known for its coffee and carrot cake. And as you can see, it was a great place to meet after school, to meet your friends, have a cup of coffee, just watch the world go by. Christine used to have a great staff team there. A lot of them were resting actors or actresses, so you could be sure that when you went in there for your cup of coffee or your Sunday lunch or your breakfast or whatever it was, there'd be someone singing, someone being very theatrical, and just making you feel really, really welcome. So I loved all of that. Also, because Christine had a sort of broad range of friends, sort of theatrical, non-theatrical, just really interesting people. There was always a fantastic vibe going on, in something really good going on in the cafe. She used to host exhibitions, with Clissold School. We had an art exhibition there once, which was really great, so the kids could sort of come along and show their art like a professional sort of private view. And then we also had a softball team, which I was really lucky to get involved with. And so the cafe staff and a few of us park staff would don the baseball gloves or the softball gloves and go out in the park and play softball against these various catering teams. So it was great fun. So it was just nice to actually, come home from work and sort of chill out, go down, see what's happening in the cafe, and then play a game of softball. And actually, we got really quite good at it, and won quite a lot of tournaments, which was also good. And the post-match food was just divine, as you can imagine. There were one or two downsides of living in a cafe. There were, on occasion, a few break-ins, which wasn't brilliant. And it always used to, you get used to the noises in the mansion, and when you're sort of tucked up in bed and just, chilling and trying to go to sleep, and then suddenly in the middle of the night you hear these great bangs coming from below. It took me a while to work out what it was, and then you realise someone's trying to break in. So you do what you have to do, protect your son first of all, and then phone the police, and then phone Christine to get her out, and because obviously with her cafe she wanted to make sure everything was okay as it could be. Interestingly, when I did phone the police, on more than one occasion they kept saying, well, yes, we're here outside the gate, could you come and let us in? Well, no, I'm not going to suddenly go out into the mansion if there's an intruder. So we had some really interesting conversations over the phone. And one night, I think there were some big repairs going on to the mansion, and there was some scaffolding at the front. And someone had climbed up the scaffolding, and there was a helicopter sort of buzzing around. And the floodlights were sort of interfilling in the flat, and my son and I were sort of cowering in the back bedroom. And sort of people hanging off the scaffolding. Thank God the police arrived and dealt with that. But there have been some very hairy moments from time to time. So yeah, living in the mansion, fabulous. But yeah, I'd like to think I played my part in sort of helping to preserve it. So it is the fabulous place it is today. It's everything I kind of hoped it would be. all those visits from the park user group who wanted, sort of interested to see what the living spaces were like, just to sort of see how a lottery bid could be put together to restore the mansion to its former glory. Because it was sort of knocked about a bit here and there. Obviously, with the gardeners using a bothy downstairs and the park patrol having an office there, it did need some TLC. But like I say, I like to think I had a bit of a hand in sort of helping that mansion be in a position where it was still there, not burnt down, and enabled to sort of be the lush place that it is today, and enjoyed by many more who can use it as function rooms and marriage rooms and so much more besides. So I'm really pleased to see it like that. It fills my heart with joy. Living in the park was really good on so many levels. When I first started as a gardener, one of my first jobs actually was working in the greenhouse. And for some of you who know or may not know, the Queen Elizabeth, no, not the Green Lanes entrance actually, where you would still sort of walk past Mr. O'Boyle's lodge and then go down into the depot side. There used to be two big old greenhouses down there. So when I first started back in 1978, we used to grow all the bedding plants for the park. So our spring and summer bedding and autumn bedding. So I learnt my skills there, pricking out and growing all the flowers and then planting that in the park. So that was a really good training for me, and I learned a huge amount from the guys and girls there. When I got there in 1978, we just sort of got transferred across from the old GLC system, so we're going back into the Hackney and the London Borough of Hackney Parks service. And there were still sort of a couple of the park keepers from the old GLC days, and Tom Kilcullen was one of them, a sort of huge Irishman, and George Houlihan, and they used to sort of walk around in long brown coats and brown hats, frightening the life out of children for riding their bikes where they shouldn't be. So it was great to sort of hear all their old stories too. But it was also great to work with the park user group, and it was nice to be involved in the committees and contribute to the meetings and sort of work with them on trying to get all the lottery bid stuff. So that was allowing them access to the mansion and on the roof as well, because the flat had access to the roof, which was another bonus. Once again, not bad for £15 a week. Towards the end of my tenure at the mansion, actually, we had a beehive on the roof, and we used to, well, the beekeeper used to make Stamford Hill honey, which was sold in the cafe and was very much liked by the current mayor at the time, Councillor Lobenstein. There were a lot of events and festivals in Clissold Park over the years, many during my time, many after my time. But back in the day, in the sort of mid to late 70s, the Parks Department used to have what was called the Hackney Show. It used to be held in Clissold Park, or in fact it was called the Stoke Newington Show then. And then it moved over to Hackney Down. So there are a few slides coming up that will show you the park service tent. So it was very sort of quite old-fashioned in many ways, where the parks team put together ornamental displays in the tent. And I did environmental education displays, because during the 80s and 90s, we took a decision really to make the animal enclosure a little bit more animal friendly by creating more habitats. So it kind of went from being a sort of Victorian animal enclosure with just so it looked beautiful, but it really wasn't that beautiful for the animals because they had very few places to hide and very few sort of habitats. So it's important to rough it up a bit in the name of nature, which we did. So the deer could have privacy while they gave birth, and the waterfowl had places to nest and bring up their young, which was great to see. One of the jobs I had was Nature Conservation Officer. And while I moved on from my gardening and direct work in the animal enclosure, we took the decision, because as years went on, things change, people's attitudes change, and people wanted different things out of their park experience. So the old rabbit pen just next to the aviary. We had a lot of vandalism, and people were pulling up the fences, and foxes used to get in and kill the rabbits, and it really wasn't a happy time for the park. So we decided, what about turning it over as a nature garden? So one of my colleagues in the gardening service put a butterfly tunnel into the old rabbit pen, which was hugely popular with the schools and also other visitors, because it was open to the public, because it never could be with animals in there. And we also turned over a bit of that animal enclosure to growing communities. So I built up a nice relationship with Julie Brown, and I believe that growing communities still operate and grow their fabulous fruit and veg there, and have farmers markets in the park, which is great. I'm very pleased again to have had a little hand in sort of shaping that. One of the benefits of living in the park was I was there 24/7, and I wanted to have somewhere for the public to go to enhance their experience of the park. So in the side of the mansion, just below the cafe, opposite the Rose Garden, there was a little room. It was underneath a canopy, and it was my nature room. And there's a lovely, sweet little slide coming up of the leaflet that we had designed, sort of offering walks and talks, and access to this little nature room where I used to collect the antlers from the fallow deer, peacock feathers, various other sort of owl pellets and things that would be of interest to children and visitors, and do a bit of storytelling with the kids as well. So that was a great addition and enhancement. I thought at the time we were sort of ahead of the game, really. And it's nice to see that there was a nature conservation and education ranger in the park. I'm really pleased that's still continued. And these last few slides, especially the one of the mansion at night time, it was actually a lovely feeling when everyone had gone home and you know the gates had been shut and you just had your dinner, and you would sort of sit there and watch a bit of television and settle in for the night. And sometimes if it was a summer evening, and my son and I would go out and just sort of check on the animals, see if they were okay, and have a walk around the park, and it felt like it was ours because we were all alone. Obviously there were many people that used to cut through and dip in and out of various things, but we always felt safe. And it was just a lovely moment. And now looking at that lovely slide of the sunset in the park, it just brings back so many happy memories. And all those fantastic veteran trees, you know, the swathes of crocuses when they all come out in bloom, and the daffodils up in green lanes. So many fantastic memories. But during those 13 years I lived there, it felt like it belonged to me. And my son, who is now 37, so that was a long, lifetime ago, really. But we still love coming back to have a look. Often we'll come along and bump into old friends, and there are a couple of park staff, I think, who are still there when I was there. So it's always nice to catch up with them and talk about old times and some of the films that were made in the park. There was High Hopes was filmed there, bits of it. So some of us had parts as extras. And it's all little bits like that that make Clissold very special. Although I'm not involved in parks in my current job, which is coordinator of Dorset Food and Drink, I am still a green flag judge. So I do get to go to visit lots of parks here in the southwest. I haven't judged London parks again, but it's something I think after COVID, I think I would like to go back to, because it would be nice to come back and have a look at some of the parks that I've visited, worked in, and Clissold Park, which I of course love living in. It's been lovely to talk about this with you guys tonight, and thank you very much to Amir for inviting me to do this. Perhaps once COVID is out the way, I can bring you more stories of park life in the future, and hopefully we can do it in person. But until then, if you have any questions, please do ask. I'll be happy to help.
Great. That was fascinating. Thank you so much. That was such a joy to listen to. Even when you hear it the second time, you pick up sort of new things. So it's really great. We had some really interesting questions from people. So Roger Wood is asking sort of, did you know Frank, the bowling green keeper who lived on the top floor of the house? And I think he added then on the chat that it was probably in the 70s. So I don't know if Frank was around.
No, he wasn't around when I was there. He did live there before I did, but I don't think I ever met him. No.
Okay, so it's not like ghost in the kind of. Do people ask you about ghost as well in the mansion? Like if I don't know if like the Reverend Augustus Clissold comes down the stairs midnight looking for his slippers or something. I don't know. Does
Yeah,
that ever happen?
always stories about ghosts. People used to ask, was the mansion haunted? We had a good experience. There was always stories about a grey lady. A couple of times my son did say, was sort of sitting in the hallway and talking to someone. We're never quite sure actually if that was something he'd seen or whether it was just him being a toddler. We don't know, but it's good vibes anyway. It's fine.
Okay, no, sounds good. We got a question from Annette Jones saying, did they ever catch the person or persons that burned the bandstand down? And she's thanking you for helping to protecting the mansion from not suffering a similar fate. But I mean, I know that the bandstand, from my research, burned down in 1966. So I guess that was a bit before your time. But
Yeah.
I mean, I guess vandalism in general, because there was also, I know there was a wooden shelter by the big pond that was told was vandalized and burnt down. So it sounds like that was quite a reoccurring thing. Is that something you came across, or did you even hear about the bandstand burning down at any point?
The bandstand burning down, no, that was before my time, but there unfortunately was quite sort of lots of spates of vandalism from the shelters used to suffer quite a lot from damage, either people pulling the wood off or actually setting it alight. Bit of damage to the bowling green from time to time. People have come and pulled the turf up. Occasionally there'd be vandalism in the animal enclosure, which was quite sad to see, because people would come in and they'd kill some of the animals sometimes, which wasn't nice. And occasionally people would drop dogs over into the deer enclosure, and so that was never nice to sort of have to tidy up after either. But on the whole, it wasn't too bad. But yeah, people sometimes do very stupid things while the park's open and also while the park's closed. I think while I was there, actually, someone did set fire to the feed shed in the animal enclosure. So that was quite a scary moment for all of us.
Okay, wow. Next one from Dorothy Newton. Who lived in the little house at the other side of the park? So I guess that's the kind of the park keeper's lodge that was built in the late sort of 19th century. So the Green Lanes one. Who was living there at the time, if you remember?
The Green Lane side, that was Mr. O'Boyle, who I believe is still living there with his family. He was there when I first started as a gardener. So yeah, they've been there for a long time. On the other side of the park in Queen Elizabeth Road, it was Dave Ruddyman. He was the cemetery manager at the time and then went on to be the manager of Springfield Park. Him and his family lived there. I believe that lodge is now not lived in at all. The last time I saw it, it was all boarded up. But Mr. O'Boyle, bless him, and his family are still in the lodge. So, you know, be nice to see him actually if I come up at some point.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's my understanding. We have another question from the Chingford Historical Society. Welcome. Wow. Are there any photos of the old park rangers that you've mentioned? So I don't know how, like old park rangers, is that from your time or more historical? I don't know if you came across any.
I've got some old snaps, I think, of some of the staff that were there during my time, but some of the old ones like Tom Kilcullen and George Houlihan, who were there when the park first went over from the GLC back into the sort of Hackney times. They were quite something to see because they still wore the brown uniforms, the long brown overcoats and the trilbies. I'm sure there are photographs somewhere. I think Mr. Boyle probably has got photographs, if anyone has. Of that, I said, but I don't have any, which is a shame.
I mean, if the Chingford Historical Society is interested, I've got one photo, I think, from the 20s of the whole park staff, and someone sent it to me because one of the park keepers in the photo, I think, is their great grandfather. So if you're interested, just drop me an email, and I'm happily sort of will share it. David Pollock is asking, do you have any recollections of the Great Storm of 1987? I know that a lot of the trees sort of came down, and there was significant damage. Is that, what's your recollection? Did the mansion actually tilt at any point?
No, it was a very weird night. It was suddenly a very mild, still night, and it was windy. We heard the wind, but then when we woke up, it was just waking up to devastation. There were trees across gates, there were fences down. I mean, thank God the animal enclosure was fine. There were a few branches that came down, but my immediate concern was, are the animals okay? And nothing's got out. But yeah, most of the gates were sort of blocked off. It was an amazing, it's quite a scary day, quite surreal in many ways. But yeah, it was a weird day.
Yeah, I mean, someone sent me photos of the aftermath of just all these old big trees completely just sort of knocked down, and I know it had a devastating effect. There was another question about the storm. We have, I think we'll take one or two last questions. So if you have any, this is your chance. And then Jones is saying, I'm sure that I fished in the pond in the mid-50s, there were no health and safety railings. So do you know when the railings were put up around the ponds? I know there were a few, looking at old photos, there were different sort of versions of them over the years, but were there any when you were there?
Yeah, there were always, ever since I started back in 1978, there were railings around the both lakes. I think the fishing lake was sort of half fenced, and then half of it didn't have a fence. But yeah, we were just, obviously there was health and safety, but not as we know it now.
Was it still used for fishing back then?
Yeah, people used to sit down at what we used to call the DDP, the Dirty Duck Pond, down at the bottom of the park. And they'd sit there for hours sort of fishing out these awful carp, and occasionally they'd fish out a pike as well. And then sort of put them back again, but it really was not a very nice experience, I don't think.
Okay, interesting. I don't know if there's any other kind of questions, but if you do have any other questions, more than happy to put you in touch with sort of Caz as well, just if there's an odd one, that'll be great. And now for our headlining act, Billy, no pressure at all. This is going to be a terrific talk. When kind of I met Billy and he talked about kind of firefighting in Stoke Newington, I was like, let's do it. And what you're about to see is a great comprehensive historical description of firefighting in Stoke Newington. I don't think anyone has ever done that kind of research, so you're in for a real treat. So we're going to take a very 2-second little break, and then Billy's going to give us his talk.
So hi, thank you for joining and welcome. My name is Billy Redding. I'm an architectural inspector, architectural historian, and specialist in historic fire stations, especially London's fire stations, which have a rich and often very surprising history. Stoke Newington has had 6 buildings, which have been its fire stations throughout its long life. And I realised that these buildings really perfectly illustrate the history of firefighting in Britain. So this is a whistle-stop tour of that history, all packed into N16. There's quite a lot to get through, so off we go. Stoke Newington has had 4 engine houses, 2 fire stations. It has 1 dead firefighting hero and a couple of very interesting plaques. I'd be impressed if anyone could tell me whether the picture here is a picture of Stoke Newington or Homerton Fire Station. There is a slight difference. There is a way to tell the difference. And if I remember, we'll come back to that at the end. So let's begin. I said, first of all, that Stoke Newington has 4 engine houses and 2 fire stations, or what's the difference between those? Before professional civic brigades emerged in the 19th century, what you had was insurance brigades. Those began in 1666. Before that, all you really had was the parish system or the vestry system, and this stretches right back into medieval times. This is communal equipment for anyone and everyone to use. There's no such thing as a professional firefighter. If a fire breaks out, everyone in the community has an interest in stopping that fire from spreading. Before fire engines begin to appear in the 16th century, what you have is pumps, squirts, and ladders. You have big long poles with hooks for pulling burning thatch off roofs, and buckets with narrow tops and fat bottoms, so that when they get passed along a human chain, they don't spill. The main thing you need is a lot of people to do the lifting and carrying of all those buckets and to fight the fire together. In this period, buildings tend to be close together, built with very flammable materials, wood and thatch. So it really is in the whole community's interests to put a fire out before it spreads. the first thing that would happen is the church bells would ring a backwards peal, so from the lowest note to the highest, and that would raise the alarm. Then everyone would run, harum scarum, the equipment would be grabbed, the human chain would be formed from the nearest well or stream. The equipment had to be somewhere communal, somewhere central to the parish, easily accessible to everybody. That might be a purpose-built structure. More likely, it's going to be a repurposed structure, possibly an agricultural building. And the ones we're looking at here, the timber frame is Wiltshire. The little cob and thatch building is Northamptonshire, and the brick building is Leicestershire. In Stoke Newington, the building that was used for the parish's first fire station, effectively, it's a building still standing. Every single one of you knows it. You'll be surprised, but it's this building here. And this is where records indicate that the parish kept their ladders and buckets. It's in the church porch. So there is a reference to the parish owning a fire engine in the 18th century, and that is kept in the churchyard. So it continues that tradition of keeping all the equipment at the church, central place that everyone can get to quickly. They possibly had a purpose-built structure, and that, although long gone, could claim to be the first purpose-built engine house for Stoke Newington. The building may have looked something like this. This one is in Castle Carey in Somerset. And I mean, we say engine, what we're really talking about is a piece of kit like illustrated here on the right. This is a pump made in Blackfriars in 1774. You have to keep tipping buckets of water into it. Two people keep having to pump the handles up and down, and then you can project the spray of water to actually fight the fire. So again, the whole community needs to be involved in getting this thing to work. So as Stoke Newington village grows and it's intensifying on its eastern side, then you see the gradual shift and the equipment being kept at the porch of the church is not really centrally located anymore. It's not convenient for everybody. So it needs to move. And in 1806, we know that there was a new engine house built at the site of the Manorial Pound near Barn Street, just off Church Street. So this is the grouping together of civic buildings and equipment. It's fairly typical. That's all we know about this building. Nothing survives. It's just about here, seen on Google Street View, where the post office is on Church Street, somewhere in the back of there. Archival research may reveal more information about that building, but alas, I've had to put this presentation together in a pandemic, so I haven't had the chance to go to the archives and dig a bit deeper, but surely information remains to be discovered if it's out there. So that building, erected 1806, takes us through into the era of the insurance brigades when they really were in full swing. This is a paid-for service, still located quite far away. They tend to be in central London. So the vestry still has an important role to play, and its shared sort of civic equipment that it owns is still really important. If you can't afford the insurance, then you still need the parish provision. So the insurance companies, although far from here, were very active in Stoke Newington. Their records exist, they're fascinating. I just went onto the LMA website, the London Metropolitan Archives, and put in Sun Insurance Stoke Newington. I got 662 results, and I don't know if you can see there, but I show some of them on the screen. It's a fascinating insight into the people and the activities that are happening in locations in Stoke Newington at the time. Some of them you can hopefully see there. So as I said, the vestry still playing a really important role providing equipment locally at this time, and it's them that are involved in the creation of the third engine house, Stoke Newington. Again, this building still standing. It's a building you'll all be very familiar with. We know from 1820 from records that Joseph Eade, local grandee, gave land here in Red Lion Lane. You can see that on the left, and funded an engine house for the parish. This is another civic grouping, as this is where the parish watch house and lockup are also located. So to briefly wander off subject and look at some other notable watch houses from around London, these two are Bermondsey and Rotherhithe. You can see the sort of canted shape of the one in Bermondsey there, I think, on the left. Nice canted corners here. And then also at St Sepulchre without Newgate, just at the city wall. And this on the right, the whole house here in Hampstead, this is a watch house where the watchman is, you know, able to sit, make tea, stay up all night, watching, doing his business. So this compares well, I think, to our little bow-fronted villa in Red Lion Lane. Now, other people in this audience will know this building better than I do. And again, because the archives are closed, I haven't been able to fully get to grips with the developmental phraseology of this group. But from the plaque, we know that this is a watch house, a lockup, and a fire engine room, 1821 and 1824. And I want you to recall this little brick building that I showed you. This is Barrow upon Soar in Leicestershire, multifunctional civic building. This building had been a watch house, a lockup, an engine house, a hearse house. So very similar, also built in the 1820s, 1827, I think is its date. And you can see how something like this may adapt and grow into our little bow-fronted villa. You can also see the double doors, and there's very small barred sort of window openings either side there. As I said, I don't know the phraseology terribly well, but the date of the engine house is suggested as 1821. And here on the left, an earlier illustration, single-story structure there with two arched openings. Far left, you've got the back of the old Red Lion pub, and these two archways, one with a keystone. On the right, you can see in this old photograph, you can see the keystone shows the right date for the fire engine room of 1821. And that right-hand arch continues to exist. The left one is demolished. Here it is bricked up in the 1970s. And here is the same view today, courtesy again of Street View. There is that arch with the little windows, the 1821 keystone, and has now become the front door to a house that sits all around and on top of it. So fascinating. And as I've said, I'm unable to fully pick apart the complex history of this building or this group, but certainly all or some or part of it is definitely Stoke Newington's third engine house from the 1820s to the 1850s. So in this period, the early 19th century, is when municipal firefighting is really growing. We have rapidly industrializing cities, and they can see that the insurance brigade system isn't really working. Edinburgh had set up the first properly municipal fire brigade. 1824 claims to be the world's oldest, and the chap they got to run it was called James Braidwood. Other British cities were following suit, sometimes jointly setting up a fire service within the police service, so sometimes the buildings are combined. London was slow off the mark. By 1833, their 10 insurance companies came together and jointly founded the London Fire Engine Establishment, and they poached Captain Braidwood from Edinburgh to come and run it. So this is still not government funded. This is the insurance companies clubbing together to try and make a city-wide service. And the vestries are still required to provide coverage and equipment locally. All of this fits into a time when there's a shift in London from a collection of disparate parishes, each doing their own thing, towards a metropolitan capital city that's meant to rival Paris and Rome and the great European capitals. And this is a conscious effort by politicians, by architects, city planners such as they were, all trying to get to grips with roads and sewers and services, and really with bureaucracy. Locally, there's a complex shift of power between Stoke Newington Vestry and Hackney Board of Works. The church warden's accounts of the 1840s show arguments about salaries, church fabric, the fire engine, the Palatine estate, and the destruction of hedgehog habitats, amongst other things. So they're really grappling with important business. In 1858, a new fire engine was bought by Hackney Board of Works expressly for West Hackney and Stoke Newington. And a new engine house, the fourth engine house, was built on the east side of the High Street. Again, this is not a building that I can illustrate because we don't know much about it, and it wouldn't have been in any way grand. It would have been a plain simple engine house, probably in brick, near to the police, opposite the police station at the very southern end of the high street. Hackney, the borough, effectively had 2 engines over at St John's. They'd had them there since the 18th century. Plus, from 1823, they'd added a third at Kingsland, which later became the de Beauvoir fire station in St Peter's Road. And then, as I said, in 1858, they added this extra engine on the east side of Stoke Newington High Street. This remained in use until the 1860s, and it was actually another great fire that caused London finally to set up a municipal fire brigade. We still had the London Fire Engine Establishment, the LFEE, paid for by the insurance companies, as well as a patchwork supply by different vestries and boards of work. There was this great cataclysmic fire, the Great Fire of Tooley Street in 1861, and in that fire, Superintendent James Braidwood was killed. Here he is, and here it is, illustration from the time. I did promise you one dead firefighting hero, and this is him. Captain Braidwood is, in fact, buried in Abbey Park Cemetery. He died in the Great Fire of Tooley Street. He was there to relieve the men who had been fighting it for hours. He ordered that they should all have a nip of brandy. And then he went in himself down an alleyway between 2 gable walls to help them. He sent them back, the firemen, and the wall collapsed and killed him. So he was buried in great state at Abney Park. The funeral procession was 1.5 miles long. Shops all along the route were closed. There were crowds lining the route. As a mark of respect, every church in the city rang muffled bells. Queen Victoria sent a personal message. So it was a big deal. And Braidwood is still remembered as the father of modern firefighting. He pioneered many things that remain. For example, he was the first person to say, don't just throw water at the flames, you have to get in and find the seat of the fire. In fact, he coined that phrase, for example, the seat of the fire. He wrote a book which is still in print about firefighting. He revolutionized the hoses, the helmets, the uniforms, the breathing apparatus, all sorts of things in his time. So he was a great force and is well remembered in the firefighting world. Because of his death and because of the great cost of the Tooley Street fire, which took 2 whole weeks to put out and cost many, many millions of pounds, the insurance companies said they could no longer run London's fire brigade. And as a result of that, the Metropolitan Fire Brigade was put in place, and it actually came into existence on the 1st of January 1866, spotted by the eagle eye of Amir Dotan on the corner of Defoe Road and Kynaston Road. SNV will be Stoke Newington Vestry for sure, and this was replaced by Metropolitan Board of Works in about 1850s. So we can guess that the plaque predates that. And we know, therefore, it's been moved because the building it's on is not that old. The vestry wouldn't have run a fire service. They would be more like obliged to make provision for firefighting. So I don't think the S stands for service. I think it means fire stop, which is a phrase they use for an access point in the water supply. So like a conduit where you could tap in and get water instead of having to go further to the well. The phrase fire stopping now means sort of filling in around or having doors that close properly. So that's something quite different, but my guess is that's what the plaque signified. How water is supplied to firefighting hydrants and so on is a very rich subject, which I don't have time for, maybe another talk. And meanwhile, we crack on with the 2 fire stations, the 2 buildings that will come to mind if I talked about fire stations in Stoke Newington. Firstly, the mighty Victorian fire station on Brook Road, Lesbian Road. Now it's a community centre, so you can go there and do yoga and all sorts of things. This is the station of 1886 by the Metropolitan Board of Works, almost certainly by the architect Robert Pearsall, who developed a distinctive fire station style. He was consciously trying to do that, looking for an identifiable sort of landmark building. He used the Gothic style, and these became really elaborate into the 1880s. He built them all over London. You can see his surviving work at Manchester Square, which is now a fancy restaurant, Bishopsgate, which is now supermarket in Woolwich, in Roman Road, which is a Buddhist centre. In Fulham, there's still an active fire station by Pearsall in the Gothic style. There was a beautiful one in Kingsland, but that's long since gone. In 1889, the Metropolitan Board of Works was replaced by the London County Council, and they took over designing fire stations. Robert Pearsall hung on for a bit, but it was then replaced, and a team of dynamic young architects took over. Stoke Newington Fire Station got an extension in 1902 that you can see on the left-hand side there. It's in a different style. It's less sort of flamboyant Gothic. It's more arts and crafts in its manner. And the design of towards more of a sort of free style of Edwardian architecture, more arts and crafts style. So you think Clerkenwell, Euston Road, or Millwall. This small station at Stoke Newington, the extension compares really well to Euston Fire Station of 1901, which is listed at grade 2 star. By 1904, the Metropolitan Fire Brigade has become the London Fire Brigade, and this is a period of great advancement as they switch from horses to motorised vehicles. The last horses turned out at Kensington Fire Station in 1921. They were brigade greys called Lucy and Nora. And these two photographs show that shift. So both from Stoke Newington. There on the left, there are horses. They're wearing the old brass helmets with the comb on top. And on the right, the early motorised vehicles. And you can see that they're actually displaying their brass helmets as sort of ceremonial things. But they're on a motorised vehicle, still open vehicle. So the firemen still have to cling on. They're outside and they have to stand on the running board and hold on tight as they go around corners. It was a bit later still before they started to get closed in vehicles. Moving on to the system of street fire alarms, which was in place from the 1880s. This is another sort of technological development that's happening around the turn of the century. They were expanded into the 1890s and 1900, and then they only start to be phased out from 1937, which is when the 999 system was first introduced by the post office. The street fire alarms, you can see this is an illustrative picture how to use one by smashing it with the heel of your shoe on the left, and on the right there's one actually in place in Stoke Newington in Albion Road. So they ceased to exist from 1958 and none survive as far as I know. The Brook Road fire station continued in active use just until the early 1980s. They used it to relieve all the other stations around, which they rebuilt, Kingsland and Homerton and Stoke Newington. I spoke to some retired firemen who'd served in this station and asked them about what it was like. And their reminiscences were mostly around a very large and difficult like hot water boiler in the basement that was known as an appy, which is short for apparatus, which used to go out all the time and fill the building with thick, acrid smoke. And you had to crawl inside it and dig out all the clinker in the morning when it had gone out. It was all getting very dirty. It seemed to be awful, but they felt very fondly about it. And so here we are. We arrive at this charming functionalist 1970s station, almost identical to Homerton, designed on the same piece of paper by the Greater London Council, which had replaced the LCC. Both stations are allocated 2 appliances, a pair of dual pump ladders. They do loads of community outreach, all fire stations in London do. You can go in and talk to them. They host school groups. They actually, in Stoke Newington, they have a mindfulness garden around the back. And of course, they're ready and waiting to turn out when the call comes in. There were 642 fires in Hackney last year, 1,829 specialist service call-outs. So that's going to be anything from road traffic accidents where they're using their specialist equipment right the way through to the cat stuck up a tree. This brings us right up to date and right to the end of my presentation. So there is a book, if you are interested in this fascinating subject. Here it is, available from all good local bookshops or to be ordered. And that's my presentation over. So thank you very much for listening, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions or expand further if I can, if you would like to address those afterwards. So thanks very much.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Billy. I've got a few questions. I know there were others as well, so let's just crack up. First question, is it known why the Tooley Street fire burned for so long?
I think it's because of the warehouses. It was an industrial landscape, and it would have been stuff unloaded from the river. So it was probably due to what they had in the stock houses, which I don't know exactly what it is, but tar, pitch, all sorts of highly flammable stuff, which they would have kept in those buildings. Yeah, I imagine that's why.
Cool. Nick Perry's asking, are there any sort of street fire alarms saved in museums anywhere? I'd love to see one myself. Have you seen any? Like,
I'm not sure.
The Fire Museum, I guess, if there is.
Yeah, my first thing to do would be ring up the London Fire Brigade and ask if they've got one. They have a museum. It used to be at Southwark Bridge Road. It's currently all sort of packed up while they wait for a new building, which is going to be in Lambeth, fingers crossed. So that's quite an exciting thing. It's going to come in the future. They've got a temporary museum in the old workshops at Albert Embankment, but they're hoping for a big site for the museum for the future. So yeah, that would be the first place I'd ask.
Cool. I think there's another question here. What triggered your interest in fire stations? Do you get that a lot?
The building on Euston Road actually is a magnificent building. I remember standing and looking at this thing across the street and thinking, it's arts and crafts. How is it that such small architectural detailing fits a huge building? It looks like a cottage, and I think it's a 5 or 6 story building. It's a whole city block. And I found that building so fascinating that when I had to pick a thesis subject, I thought, why don't I look into this? And no one else had ever really researched the subject. So I became the expert. I found myself being introduced as the leading expert. And I was like, having a laugh. But no one else has done it. So so that's where it came from. Yeah, so Euston Road. Go and have a look.
So you're Mr. Fire Station then?
That's it.
Okay, I've got a question here. When will we post the recorded version? So that will be, I suspect, sort of next week or end of kind of next week. So the entire session will be available online if you want to watch it again, or if you missed part of it, or if you want to send it to someone that couldn't attend, then I'll send an email to the mailing list, and it's going to be on Twitter as well. So if you follow any of those, you'll find out. Looking if there are any question. Is the Leswin Road N16 considered Stoke Newington or Clapton? So that's actually related to a question I had as well about what was the coverage area, because I was curious, like you mentioned, there was the vestry, the Hackney Board of Works from 1900 when you had the metropolitan boroughs of Stoke Newington and Hackney. Yeah. What was the kind of the coverage that the station had? Was it municipal, or was it some divisional way of splitting it?
I mean, the vestry would have covered the boundaries of the vestry, but if there was a fire just outside, like I was saying at the beginning, it's in everyone's interest. It's a major sort of community event, so they would have gone to it. People often say the insurance brigades would stand and watch if the neighbouring building was burning, but it was insured by somebody else, and that's not really true. They used to help each other out. So it's about initial response, and then the brigades from slightly further away would come as well, and everyone would work together in putting it out. So it's really about who can get to it quickest. Yeah. The Lesbian Road station is always called Stoke Newington Fire Station within the brigade, and they have subdivisions and so on. So it's in the northern area, I think. But they're a very collaborative group, so everyone's helping everyone out.
Yeah, because I was wondering if they actually had some official boundaries that they can then go beyond, or is it really like how do they allocate which station will attend which fires? So
they do have boundaries, yeah, and they would be the first response. So the call would be directed to that local station, but then the other local stations would all pick it up, and they would be second and third responders. So they would then come afterwards as well. They used to call the firemen used to call Stoke Newington, Homerton and Kingsland the triangle of fire, because there were so many incidents within their fireground, within their patch.
Great, excellent. I'm just looking if there's any kind of other questions. I mean, someone is saying that there's a fire station at the top of the road and was not mentioned. but it doesn't say which road. So Paul R. And he's also asking, is it considered Stoke Newington? So it's called Stoke Newington, always has. I guess the Lasvin Road one, it wasn't called Clapton Station, but it would have covered areas outside the borough of Stoke Newington as well, right? So that, I think that's kind of the idea. Fire marks from insurance companies can be seen on houses still. I mean, I told you in preparation for this one, the only one that I've seen in the area is in Amherst Road, just close to the church and kind of Stoke Newington Road.
Yeah,
if anyone is
aware, up in this book, which is considered the Bible of fire marks. It's a thick book, as you can see, and I couldn't actually decide for myself which insurance company that was. It's a shield with a chevron with 3 snakes and 3 sort of indistinct blobby shapes on it. It could be the Guardian insurance company, but I couldn't actually find a match for it, so that's why I didn't mention it, because I wasn't.
I was curious because when I saw it, I was also curious if it's an original or just some replica that someone got from a flea market and just put in the house. You never know. Just to go, so I think Paul, the Victorian station that Billy showed, that's the Lasvin Road one. So unless I'm misunderstanding, so that's the one top of Lasvin Road. It was always called Stoke Newington Station, covered that area and the surrounding kind of area as well. Andrew Grace is asking, how would you notify the insurance company that there was fire? So if they were based, I don't know, so you got the insurance, you're in Stoke Newington, the insurance company, would you just run and ring a bell?
You would send a runner. You would find some young urchin, give them a penny and send them off, and they would run as fast as they could to get there. And then the insurance brigades would, if you got involved pumping the machines that they had, you got beer tokens for helping. So they would actually, at the end, distribute beer tokens to all the people that had helped. And there's a real shift in the sort of professionalization of the brigades in about the 1850s, 1860s, where they actually come to a point where they want the public to step back and they want to do it themselves. They don't want the people involved anymore, because the crowd want to help, also want beer tokens, will come forward. So that's a really important shift in the history of firefighting, is when actually members of the public are told, you step back and we'll do this.
It's kind of like crowdsourcing with beer tokens. I like that. Peter Williams is asking, was the tower at the Stoke Newington fire station used for spotting fires? So there used to be a tower that's now gone. Was that like just to watch and see if smoke is coming out?
No, that is a really interesting question, because if you think about industrial London and every single house having chimneys, how do you detect a fire? But really heavily burning fire will give out a different kind of billowing smoke to a chimney. But it's a hotly debated issue in the fire history.
So that tower, do you think it was purely ornamental or was it actually functional?
I think the architects wanted to create an identifiable landmark building, and I think the watchtower was part of that. They certainly use it for drills. So if you're a young fireman, you are going to get sent to run up and down it 10 times. They used to, before the hoses became what we'd call sort of modern, they used to use different materials which needed to be dried out at the end. So they had to hang them. And actually in the center of those towers, you quite often have hooks and a sort of well in the staircase where they can dry out the hoses. So that's another use. And then they also have telegraph equipment on them, and they can sort of wave at the tower of the neighbouring station and communicate that way. So there's a variety of uses there, whether they genuinely, and also firemen were often recruited from the Navy. So this sort of idea of climbing up the rigging and being on the top and keeping a watch, it all sort of fits in, and I think more with drill and practice. But whether they actually had someone posted up there keeping a weather eye on, the horizon of Stoke Newington looking for a fire, I'm not convinced, but I remain to be convinced by someone.
So, because we have another question here from David Pollock saying, were there any notable fires in Stoke Newington, and when was the tower demolished, if you know?
I really wanted to say when the tower was demolished, and I couldn't put a date on it. I think it's roughly when they moved out of the building, and they took it down because it would have, it cost so much to maintain. These are really ornate Victorian buildings, and it's just, you have to pour money into looking after them. I couldn't actually prove the date that the watchtower was removed. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
About any notable fires. I mean, the only one that I came across was there was a fire in the timber yard that used to be where the kind of the flats and houses behind where Whole Foods is now. So Wincop's timber yard caught fire.
That's right.
I know that's the one that people mention over the years. Have you come across any other notable fires?
There are very many big, because there's industrial sites and domestic fires. There are many, and I came across many accounts of them. One very interesting one isn't in the churchyard. You'll know this, Amir. Isn't there a grave which says something about a girl who died because her dress caught fire while she was ironing? From the 1760s or 1780s.
Okay.
Like a half-formed memory that's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is, I read somewhere, is the earliest reference to firefighting in Stoke Newington. And I think it actually specifically says on the grave that's what happened to that poor girl.
Okay, I've got, I think, last question before we call it an evening. People might have some sort of dinner plans as well. Someone's asking, can you answer the question above about the bells ringing backwards? But I'm trying to locate that original question. So I don't know if you can just maybe repeat that. That'd be great. I'm just kind of scrolling up. I must have missed it.
I didn't understand this, and I spoke to a bell ringer about, because I came across a reference to, which was from the Great Fire of London actually, but it seems to have been common practice that they would ring. So if you ring the bells from the highest to the lowest, it's called a peal, like a round, ding, 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 ding. And when there was an alarm for the fire, they would ring it backwards. So they'd start with the tenor bell and then ring up. So if you heard that, you're like, shit's going down, we better sort this out. So that was the way that they drew attention to, there's a fire happening.
So that's the ringing backwards. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, peal, I don't really know campanological terminology terribly well, but a peal, apparently, a backwards peal is what they're called.
Okay, wow, fascinating. You learn so much from these evenings. It's fascinating. I'm probably going to go
always learning as well. I'm ready to be corrected if someone.
I'm probably going to go and Google it in a minute. But I think it's been really, really fascinating. From start to finish, it's always these events. You just learn so much, and it definitely exceeded my expectations. So it's been really, really good. Hopefully everyone else enjoyed it. I think we're trying see if we can zoom everyone back in, including our sort of tech wizard that has been orchestrating this whole event, has done the recordings as well. You haven't really seen him as much, but Nick is the one that did the recordings, created this whole YouTube to Zoom sort of linkage that made this evening possible. I wasn't sure how we can actually translate from in person to an online event. I felt it went very well. So thank you all for getting the tickets, for attending. As I mentioned, hopefully the next event is going to be in February, probably the same setting unless things are going to change drastically. I don't know, but that's kind of the target date at the moment. If you have any questions about any of the talks, you can get in touch with me. I'll forward your emails to Caz or Billy. Otherwise, the recordings will be online in a few days or maybe a week or two, and you'll find out through the mailing list and Twitter and so on. So again, thank you so much, Billy, Caz, Nick, for making tonight a reality. I kind of had my doubts if you can actually pull it off, so I'm really, really thrilled. And yeah, I'll see everyone at the next event.